Says none. Well, you guys, thank you for being here. Today, we're going to learn how you can identify digital assets critical to your mission and determine what threats to prepare for. My name is Aretha Simons. I'm the webinar producer here. I'm going to show you how you can engage. I know many of you come to our webinars and we love you. The main thing is when you leave, there's going to be a survey that's going to pop up. Two questions. If you could answer the question, let us know what you thought of the webinar and what other topics you would like to hear. Please do that for me. This is recorded. You're going to get the recording probably later today along with the slides. If you need the closed caption, just hit on that CC button. I'm going to get ready to move out the way and turn it over to our speakers. Welcome to the stage, Francis Johnson and Felipe Mondragon. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Aretha. Appreciate the introduction. I'll let Felipe get us into presentation mode here. There you go. All right. Appreciate that. All right. So as Aretha said, right now we are about to go through a webinar titled Identifying and Managing Cyber Risk. All right. And so it's always a hot topic with cybersecurity, and we hope to convey a few different items to you today. So can we go to the next slide, Felipe? All right, so Felipe and I work for an organization called Tech Impact. And as you can see on the slide, our mission is to leverage technology to advance social impact. We deliver on our mission in a few ways. Starting on the left, you see that we provide a full spectrum of nonprofit technology services to other nonprofits. So we're a nonprofit that serves other nonprofits in the sector. So our services include everything from managed support services. We provide implementation project work, cloud, data, etc. And we also, apropos for this presentation, we also provide a lot of cybersecurity services. So anything from initial assessments to ongoing advice to incident response and things like that. We also create independent and thoroughly researched technology resources for the nonprofit sector. That includes anything from workbooks to guides to webinars. So we obviously partner with great organizations like TechSoup to provide webinars such as this. And last but definitely not least, we also provide technology training, primarily for young adults to help them launch their careers in IT, help them get their feet in the door. And so all these services help nonprofits and communities thrive. Next slide. All right, and so I've been talking so far. My name is Francis Johnson. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Tech Impact. That means a few things, but in short, I lead some of our technology teams in delivering some of the services I mentioned earlier. So, you know, infrastructure projects, cybersecurity compliance, etc. I've been working in nonprofit technology for about 18 years now, and I'm extremely passionate working with nonprofits of all sizes and helping them truly, you know, build the technology and operational capacity to help further their missions. And I'll let Felipe do an intro on himself.
Thank you, Francis. So hello, everyone. My name is Felipe, and I'm a cybersecurity consultant with Tech Impact. Been working in this space for a long time across many different fields, but I'm excited to be here with Tech Impact as well. One of my favorite things about working with Tech Impact is getting the opportunity to work with nonprofits and helping them develop their own capabilities to manage cyber risk.
Great. And so we're going to go over the agenda quickly here. So we have quite a few things in terms of slides for content. But yeah, so we're going to start with cyber risk and kind of define that for you and talk about the impact to nonprofits. Then we're going to talk about what's next in terms of identifying critical assets in your organization. We're going to talk about the cyber threat landscape and the fact that it's ever evolving, and give you a few examples there. And then, what do you do next, right? How you find weaknesses in your organizations and what to do about them. And then, last but not least, talking about prioritization and management of risk. So, without further ado, we'll jump right into the slides, and Felipe will start.
Thank you, Francis. So, as Francis said, first we're going to start talking about discussing why cybersecurity risk is important, and how it impacts you as a nonprofit. So we'll start with sharing a little bit of information about some recent incidents. Some of these you may have seen in the news. The first one is a ransomware attack, which is you hear that, I'm sure, very often. It's one of the most devastating attacks that can befall a nonprofit organization. And in this case, it was even worse, as it was hospital operations we're talking about getting disrupted. So think about those cascading impacts of services and systems not being available, and ultimately possibly impacting patient care. This particular incident did disrupt hospital operations. It created long delays for patient care and forced emergency care divisions, as this particular hospital did have an emergency room. So it's important to think about the physical ramifications, right, of a cybersecurity incident, which of course is very apparent when we're talking about a nonprofit that serves the community the way a hospital does. The second incident we want to share with you is a data breach, so a bit different from the hospital in terms of it's less about disruption of physical processes and more about theft of data, right? So also very it's something you definitely do not want to happen at your organization, because the consequences are different than the physical consequences of service disruption. However, just as important to avoid. We're talking about private data being released, 1.35 million records, I believe, including Social Security numbers, which can be devastating in terms of the impact it has, not only on those affected, but also on the organization itself, right? In terms of their reputation and the trust that they built, not only with the community they serve, but with their donors as well, could be irreparably damaged. So many of these attacks that we just discussed here are usually come across email, right? It's #1 attack vector that we see. And those types of attacks are up in recent months, 35.2% actually. And credential theft, which for those of you who've not heard of that, that's when an attacker tricks you into giving them your username and password, are up 50%, so huge increase there. We typically see that as the primary attack vector simply because it's very easy to pull off, right? Attackers have discovered that they can email large quantities of organizations and quickly gather a lot of credentials, tricking people into thinking they're downloading an attachment from a colleague, or from perhaps a vendor or someone else that they work with. Or in some cases, they might receive an email from no one they know, but that unfortunately many people are still clicking and giving that information away. So let's talk a little bit about why this happens, right? Why are these challenges unique to the nonprofit space? So #1, as most of you, I'm sure, have dealt with at one point or another, is not quite as much funding dedicated towards IT or cybersecurity as maybe some other organizations have. And that limits the amount of tools, investment in tools that can be made, and also the type of staffing that you can bring in to dedicate to managing this type of risk. And put that together with the fact that many nonprofits deal with sensitive population groups and maintain sensitive data on them. So you put that all together and it creates some very unique challenges for managing that cyber risk. So as we've already learned, these types of cybersecurity incidents have very real impacts. As I mentioned before, you can lose the confidence of your donors, your donor base, may impact your ability to retain specific funding at the state or federal level. Your reputation in the industry, it can take a hit, in many cases take years to repair. In some cases, you may face regulatory fines. For example, if we're talking about a loss of control of some HIPAA information. And then, of course, overall, the number one impact is disruption of the services which you all deliver to the community. Francis,
All
you
right.
want to tell us about the digital assets?
Absolutely. So yeah, appreciate that. A lot of good information there. So we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into some of what Felipe just mentioned, specifically what we are gonna call here digital assets. Can you move to the next slide, please? So what is a digital asset? You might be asking. Simply put, it's what a cyber criminal, a bad actor wants to get from your organization, and you all have, it doesn't matter your size or really shape or size, all of you have some level of data and in a digital asset form that can be compromised or stolen. And so that's really, think about it from like, what's the carrot here in terms of all these cyber crimes? It's like, this is what it is. It's essentially data, and data comes in different forms. And so some of the examples of digital assets are the data you get from your donors. So donor information stored in a database, that's a digital asset. If you are or an organization that's client facing, you collect data from your clients and you store it wherever you might store it. That is also a digital asset, and I could go on and on. Obviously, your financial records, wherever, if you have a financial or accounting software, wherever you essentially manage that, that is also digital assets, and obviously IP, intellectual property, and that particular data as well. And so that's really what is in your organization and what is valuable to a cyber criminal, and why they do all they do to get inside your environments and to attempt to at least either infiltrate or compromise that for various reasons. And so looking at like what your specific digital assets are and take an inventory of them is this a first step in really the identification process that we're going to talk about today. And so knowing what digital assets are, they're going to help you also identify where they are, how they're collected, et cetera, and then mapping them to your mission. So you can't protect or work on everything at once. You want to make sure you have priority to your protection methods and things like that. So mapping them to your mission and figuring out what's the most critical and mapping all of that out can at least give you a roadmap on how to remediate any issues that you might have, start to layer on real protection against these, on top of these digital assets, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, find out where they are, identify what they are and where they are in your organization, mapping them to your mission and your processes, and going down the line. And the last piece of this is how are they accessed and what is accessing them, so to speak. And so going back to the donor database, who in your organization is accessing the donor database? How are they accessing it? What machine are they using? Is that machine? And then there's other questions that come into that. Is the endpoint protected? Is the computer that they're using, have, antivirus software on it? Are they using a password that is unique to them? Is there multi-factor authentication? So there's there's a lot of questions that come to that will beget other questions as you go down the line in terms of where your again, what your digital assets are, how are we going to essentially take time to work on each one, and then take an inventory of how they are being accessed, because that's the key. It's like access control is key to the protection of these digital assets, and going down the line, endpoints, applications, where is that sensitive data? Do the third party vendors that you work with have access, et cetera? So there's a lot of moving parts here, and that's why we laid it out this way and take it down the steps of 1, 2, and 3. Before you can really understand the access level, you must understand what people are accessing and where it is in your organization. Anything you want to add here, Felipe?
No, I think you captured. Just want to make one extra point. There's these inventories that you come out of this exercise with are key. It's gonna You'll find out later how it's going to be used, but it's important you maintain these somewhere safe and secure, and then review them periodically as you know things that there are changes in your organization. Don't forget to update your inventories.
Absolutely. Great.
Okay, moving on. We're going to start talking about threats now. So threats, unfortunately, cannot be controlled, but it's important to understand what they are and what they seek, so that at least you can prepare yourselves to face them. So on the left here, you'll see what we're calling a threat actor. So as Francis mentioned before, he was talking about cyber criminals, and you'll hear that most often. Those are the ones we might encounter the most in the nonprofit space. And then the second column there is what drives them, as Francis also was talking earlier about why they do what they do. And then the third column there is the how, right? So what are they going to do to try to achieve their goal? And then of course some real world examples there of what that threat looks like once it's in action, right? So taking it across the top. So as I mentioned before, the financial criminals are number one. We see probably the most in the nonprofit space. And again, just the very simple motivation is to make money, right? And the typical tactics of ransomware is the most devastating we see, is holding organizations for ransom. We see that very often with facilities like healthcare facilities where it really hurts them to be down even an hour, more likely to make that payout. And phishing is a tactic that's used very broadly. I'm sure all of you here have experienced it, maybe on a daily basis in some cases. Is the main delivery method for those malicious payloads like ransomware, for example. Business email compromise is huge as well and can be a really tough nut to crack. What we often see is a small organization will have their business email compromised, and then they send thousands of emails out to their contacts, vendors, clients, and it just shoots out of there. It just goes on and on. So one phishing attack can go on for days, infecting different other emails and organizations. And fraud, of course. So you have to be very cognizant that and while we are talking about cyber threats here, but the cyber criminals have developed other ways to try and social engineer their way into your organization and trick maybe the payroll person to start paying a particular employee to a different bank account, or maybe posing as a vendor, asking them to switch their bank account as well. So um, all of these are, like, again, probably more than 75% of the incidents we see are from cyber criminals. Nation state, we don't see as much of those. Those are more targeted, but they're much, much more dangerous, and they're much better funded. So in many cases, if you have to worry about a nation state type actor, you probably already know it based on the type of work that your organization does. But they use much more highly developed tactics and targeted malware, for example. The next one down, hacktivists, or again, don't see that as often. Very, very targeted towards specific types of organizations, and their main goal is to just disrupt, maybe take your website down, expose your private data from your organization, or DDoS, which is a denial of service attack, which is where they'll consistently bombard your website, or in some cases your firewall, with traffic requests, so that effectively taking it down. Insider threat. So this is a unique one. I'll spend a little bit more time on this one because it's a tricky one, because insider threat may not necessarily be a malicious insider or a disgruntled employee, which is what most people think of when they hear that. In many cases, it could be accidental. An insider threat simply means you have individuals in your organization that have a level of privilege in the particular application or access to a specific data set. And if not trained properly, or if they don't have the right tools, they may either intentionally or accidentally, which is what we see most often, share sensitive information with individuals with the wrong individuals, right? What that might look like is perhaps in a hurry putting an email together, throwing some sensitive information in, and typing in the person's name, and it fills in the wrong name, and then they send the email off to the wrong person. So, or in some cases, just sending links out, sharing information, not realizing that that particular folder in Google or SharePoint contains other sensitive information that that person should not really have access to. So, of all the different threats, this one is, it can be just as dangerous. However, this is the one that's a little bit easier to mitigate that threat through training and proper, as we heard earlier, maintaining good access management. But it's a big issue because most people don't think about that accidental or person in the organization as being an insider threat. So, and then opportunistic attackers. So this is much less common that we see, but it does happen. There's individuals who develop automated computer scripts to just look across the internet for someone who may have misconfigured their Office 365 environment, and they don't realize that they have a user account that's not protected, or maybe they have a VPN set up in their office, but they accidentally left a port open. And so those types of attacks are less common, but they can be equally destructive. So that's what's very important to always, we talked earlier about inventories. One of those things is making sure you're aware of all those access points to your organization and making sure they're configured correctly.
I would say with the rise of AI, it's going to be more common, quite frankly, with the opportunistic attackers, because they just basically it's just a lot easier to
That's true.
essentially cast a wider net, essentially, and just automatically find holes and essentially try to exploit the vulnerabilities out there. And so it's important to again, is secure as much as possible, especially with we've been moving to the cloud for a long time. And so as you move to the cloud, it's, there's some things that don't necessarily get configured, et cetera. And once it's on the internet, it makes it a little bit more easier for these opportunistic attackers to essentially just try to find as many open internet endpoints and successfully gain access to your environment. So
Excellent point, Francis. So if any of you have been juggling, maybe you were used to have an on-premise network with the VPN, and you've moved to the cloud, but you're kind of have one leg in, one leg out. It's just what we say in security is you always want to reduce your attack surface. So the less you have to manage and keep configured, the better, generally.
absolutely. And that moves us into vulnerabilities, right? So just talking about weaknesses in your organization's environment. And so you can go right to the next slide. And so we can talk about how that plays out in an organization. And so if you think of it in three different sections, right? People, technology, and process. There are vulnerabilities in each, and we can separate them and talk about them separately, so to speak, but they are intertwined, right? Your staff members access your technology, hopefully using some level of a workflow or SOP or process, right? And so they're intertwined, but we will basically pull them out separately to talk about it. And so essentially a vulnerability is a flaw or a weakness in a system, either design of a system, implementation of a system, et cetera, or management of a system that can be exploited by a malicious actor, bad actor, cyber criminal, opportunistic attacker, et cetera, right? And so it's really whatever the flaw is that it can be exposed and exploited. And and we got a list here of a few under each section is and with people vulnerabilities. We're talking about staff training gaps, like there's a lack of training, lack of security awareness training, etc. Social engineering and risk. Again, I think that ties into training, quite frankly, helping your staff members and employees uh, at least be prepared for things like phishing attacks, etc. And on the processes is lack of clear policies and inconsistent password practices and technology, outdated software, etc. So this is a list. It's a shortened list. This list could go on for a while, but obviously we wanted to summarize this. The way I like to really color vulnerabilities for folks is that everything that I essentially just rattled off or is on this particular slide, think of it from a control perspective. Felipe just did a whole, talked about the threats, all the threats out there. We don't have control on how often a cyber criminal tries to attack an environment, what time they do it, what even their motivation is. We do have control, by and large, on vulnerabilities, right? We have control on how often we train our staff and employees and how often we really tie that into organizational governance, for example. We have control on whether we are going to ever create a policy, whether we're going to update our policies, or whether we're going to make that part of our organization's fabric, right? So that's a control perspective that we can control. And then, in the technology space, you have control on whether you're going to update your software or not, right? So, and that's that there's a vendor piece to that where the vendor has to release updates for you to run them. But if they're released, you have to run them, right? You have to install the latest security patches to make sure that whatever exploitation that was out there, you protect yourself against. And so it's important to highlight that because it's one of those things that I think if you really think of, you can really act upon and help you and your organization protect yourself as much as possible. It's an evolving and it's ever evolving process of protection, data protection, organization protection, but understanding that these vulnerabilities are essentially in your control and how you go about, essentially addressing them should be at the forefront of your cybersecurity program. You could add to that. Go ahead. I'm looking
Thank
at
you,
you.
Francis.
You could add to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking, I don't know, I'm curious to get your input, Francis, but of
Sure.
the three listed here, the one that I see the biggest issue usually with in the nonprofit space is the process vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah,
say.
simply because most of the organizations, as we mentioned before, are trying to do a lot with a little. And usually the
Yeah.
processes within an organization aren't well documented. It's very ad hoc. So, and that can lead to a lot of hidden vulnerabilities that maybe won't get bubbled up. So it's very important to document those, clearly
Yeah,
understand
there's a
who's
level
doing what.
there's a level of dedication to it, right? So it's
Yeah.
almost its own set of tasks, right? Because you can't just
Hmm.
build a policy in January and leave it alone for 3 years, right? The policies
Yeah.
are, that you did 3 years ago are outdated at this point because the threats have changed, right? The
Right.
your landscape has changed. You probably changed your software. You never updated how
Yeah.
you should be dealing with your new software. And again, you're right. I think it's because it's ever changing and you have to be on top of it. You have to revise things. You have to look at your processes. You have to scan, and see what's out there in terms of technology use, et cetera, and protect that with policies and governance. It is very difficult. And yeah, you're right. I think it's difficult not only to create a bunch of these, but again, update them in a as frequently as possible, right? It's hard to uh, you know, do it as frequently as every single vulnerability that comes out. But on a schedule that makes sense, it's just difficult. With everything else you have to do in your organization and the mission that you're essentially trying to carry on. So yeah, I would say it's definitely one of the toughest pieces, and that does lead for which does bleed into how people interact with technology because the process should essentially dictate and guide that. And if the process and the policies aren't in place, you might have a lot of non-compliance when it comes to the use of technology in your organization.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about now we've talked about threats and vulnerabilities. Now, what do we do with all of it, and how do we know where to start, right? Um, so we have to do is now take a look at what threats are the ones that are going to be most likely to impact us, and then where are our weak points, and then we have to put together an assessment, right? So we have to assess, okay, where does that intersection lie between the threats and the vulnerabilities? So in order to do that, you have to perform a risk assessment. Um, and so once the risk assessment is complete, then you have, okay, your specific set of risks. Then you have to start deciding, okay, we can't do everything at once, right? We may not have the money or the time. So then we've been talking about this also about prioritization, right? So which ones are the ones that are highest, which means it's the most likely to happen and would have the largest impact, right?
Mhm.
And then, so the way you manage risk is through you mitigate it if possible, right? So there are controls you can put in. Francis was talking about controls before. So basic technology controls, right? So hopefully all of you have some type of security, scanning your emails, some type of email threat gateway, checking for phishing, spam, etc. Endpoint software, another basic control. Ideally, it's some type of advanced next generation, at least anti-malware to make sure you don't have any malware on your environment. And then staff training, right? Huge. One of those table stakes controls is make sure the individuals in your organization know, number one, what threats to look out for, social engineering, and how to prepare for it. Especially those who have privileged access maybe to some application or data, in terms of being aware of the sensitivity of that information and what they can and can't do with it. And then developing policies, right? So we were just talking about the importance of policies for reducing vulnerabilities in your process environment. But starting out with very basic templates, right? Okay, this is kind of the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And you wanna base those policies on known frameworks. So what I would advise you all to do is not to just well, in the old days you would Google something and pull a template, random template from somewhere and back into it. Now it's chatbots, right? I would advise against jumping straight into that a path, and first become familiar with, okay, what are we trying to achieve here with our security policy? And based on the type of work that you do at your nonprofit, there should be some type of established framework. Some of you may have heard of NIST, NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology. Um, and there's well thought out frameworks with the roadmaps and lots of really good information based on what it is you do. So if you have a healthcare based nonprofit, there are healthcare cybersecurity frameworks where you can find, and they have tons of really good information to help you uh, put your own custom security program together based on your level of maturity and the types of controls that you need. So very important there. Again, rather than just throw together a random policy template from the internet or from ChatGPT and have some poor intern spend 4 hours customizing it, really think about what it means to write that policy, and what is the spirit of the policy, and how is it going to help your organization go from maybe maturity level 0 eventually up to 1, 2, and 3, and to where you're kind of just kind of making changes and making process improvements. And so once you get to that point and you are making those improvements, auditing is a very important method of actually mitigating risk. It's underappreciated, I think, in the security space. But let's say, for example, one of your critical applications is a fundraising donor database. So regularly audit who has access to that information. When I say regularly, I mean maybe once a quarter, depending on the size of your organization. If your organization is very small and you can kind of tell who's coming in and out. But if it's a larger organization and you may not be up to speed on who the new people are, who got terminated, or whose role changed, closely auditing the identity and access for your critical assets is very important. Also learning unfortunately, if you are to suffer some type of security incident, it's very important to sit down as an organization and talk about, okay, why did this happen? What can we do in the future to avoid this from happening again, right? And then overall, making sure that everyone in the organization is aware of the direction you're trying to take the organization to. So, for example, if you ask anyone in your organization, once you're going on this journey, if they understand what the security policy is for the organization, they should be able to answer, yes, we all read it during training and it's this, and this is the spirit of it. So it has to be everyone, pulling the rope in the same direction for this to work. Otherwise, your policies and your controls will just be will die in the vine, and they'll sit in the SharePoint or Google Workspace or wherever until the next time a security insurance renewal comes along and you have to say that you have it. So it's very important that you build that culture of security from the ground up within the organization, and everyone contributes. Francis, do you want to add anything here?
Can we pause for questions? We have a few. I don't want to ignore the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, Justin.
Yeah, thanks. We'll just start right at the top. We have a question from Dave. He's asking, what are your feelings on utilizing hardware two-factor authentication, such as YubiKeys, to help prevent credential theft?
So yeah, I like that. I'm not going to go on a soapbox rant here, but I'm becoming more and more against the use of normal authentication like passwords. I mean, to me, the password should have died a long time ago. It's one of the biggest credential theft processes there, and it's one of those things that has been around for a long time. So things like YubiKey and hardware authentication, biometrics, fingerprint, face recognition, to me are the authentication methods that should be used going forward. It's definitely, it's harder to steal, as you mentioned, with credential theft and things like that. Unless somebody's physically around you, as opposed to remotely trying to attack you. And so, yeah, I am all for updated authentication methods like hardware-based, or, as I said, biometric, using your fingerprint or your facial recognition, etc. So I would say absolutely go for that. Anything to add to that, Felipe?
No, 100% agree.
Great.
Thanks. We have a couple of questions from Deb. She's asking, what are your, excuse me, what are your recommendations regarding the use of shared logins for small nonprofits? I think what she's meaning is, multiple people using one password or a different way of managing that.
You want to take that, Felipe?
Yeah. Thank you,
So,
Francis. No, I don't avoid that at all.
Avoid it.
Yeah, it's not. So there's two issues there, right? So number one is it's much more difficult to maintain a good password if you're sharing it between 5 different people. Now, there's 5 different people who may give it out or forget it or whatever, and you won't be able to use effective multi-factor authentication when you have more than one person using it. It becomes challenging registering that device. And number 3, you lose something very important, which is an audit trail. So if something happens when that user is logged in, you won't be able to tell who is the person that actually made that change or deleted that file. But again, so if it's an issue of convenience, I strongly recommend not doing it. Everyone should have their own unique ID and access to a particular application. But Francis, I'm interested to get your opinion here. But if it's a question of cost and also these uh, how important the asset is, right? So are we talking about like a kiosk computer that's in the lobby of your
Mhm.
office that doesn't really have anything on it? You can just really get to the company webpage. Then maybe you can accept that risk. Um, but it's something that should be reviewed periodically. But if we're not talking about something simple, if we're talking about access to an application that contains sensitive information, then I think that's a hard no.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree wholeheartedly. If you absolutely have to use shared passwords, I would suggest using a password manager for a couple of reasons. Number one, the password isn't again shared literally on people's desktops where or note, or sticky note or whatnot, right? It's protected from that perspective. And going back to Felipe's audit log process, it's like we can at least audit people logging into the password manager before logging into that shared space. But again, really avoid it. I understand sometimes license costs and things like that, but if it's sensitive data, some of you want unique passwords plus other authentication, not just passwords too, right? So
We have two questions. I think I'm going to combine them. We would like to know, where would AI fall under, how you view threat actors? What are the risks around AI? And then I'm going to combine that with, is cybercrime insurance worthwhile?
So I talked a little bit. I jumped in on one of Felipe's slides at the end. So the opportunistic attackers are using AI, and they are really good at AI. And so they figured out how to, and they've always been about automation, but with AI helping even really advance that piece. So they're using it against to scan as many endpoints, as many nodes as possible. And so cyber criminals are absolutely using AI right now, and that's really why a lot of these conversations are super important in terms of protecting your environments. Because again, all it really what they're doing is trying to do steal as much data with the least amount of effort. And so they're not going to, if you have protected or added additional authentication methods to your cloud environment, they're not gonna then be like, oh, I didn't get in one time, and then I'm gonna try again and again and again. They're gonna just go to the next person because the next environment is probably not protected. So it's a again it's phishing in terms of FIS fishing in terms of going out and seeing who can you get and not necessarily put a lot of effort into really hacking out there, right? So that's where AI I've seen really exploded in the cyber criminal world. And obviously all the other threats that Felipe laid out, there's obviously some component of AI on there as well. But the opportunistic attackers are really ramping up their AI use. And cyber insurance, it's worth it. It is worth it. Now, I think some of the premiums just keep rising, but it is worth it. We found that, you know, it really depends on who your carrier is. I would say be very careful when selecting your provider for insurance, but I would say it is worth it. It's just one more tool in your toolbox, so to speak, when it comes to your cybersecurity program. Anything to add there, Felipe?
Yeah, so one of the important things when you're selecting cybersecurity incident coverage is knowing what your liability is, right?
Mm.
So earlier we talked about critical processes and you have all that documented. So then you can sit with your broker and determine, okay, do I need $10 million insurance to cover for um, public a publicist to come and speak on our behalf to the news? Maybe not that piece. So it's important that you really get into the details of what the coverages are that you need to make sure you don't over-insure and then you lead up your budget, which could be used for other security controls. So, don't be afraid to push back on your broker and say, look, I want to make sure we're getting the right level of coverage. And then you should be having that discussion with your broker in terms of, okay, what's the maximum impact here? And so you can kind of arrive at that perfect middle ground where you're like, okay, this is our maximum impact. If the worst case scenario, we're looking at this much in liability, then your broker should be able to make sure he or she lines you up with the right amount of coverage. So just something to keep in mind.
Perfect. We'll do one more question right now, and then we can go back to the presentation to make sure we have enough time to finish that up. And if time allows, we will capture a few more questions at the end. But this question is around a best practice. It says we are frequently sending attachments by email to our board members. Wondering if sending attachments is okay, or if storing those in a centralized location, such as a Google Doc type file and folder, and sending the link instead of the actual attachment would be a better idea.
Yeah. In that situation, you have to take into account what information is within the attachment. If it's sensitive information you do not want to get out to anyone except for the board member, then it's better to keep it controlled, and have them log in and view it. Depending on the type of platform you have, if it's Google or Microsoft, you'll have additional DLP, data loss prevention tools available to you, which they can then configure and maybe only allow them to view it, not allow them to print it or forward the email, etc. So definitely the latter option. It offers you more control over the information, particularly if it contains sensitive information.
Sounds
Right.
good. Thank you very much. Let's head back to our presentation.
All right, thanks,
Okay.
Tristan. So before you go to the next slide, I want to pick up on the last piece you said there around essentially you'll get into the culture, and to me the biggest thing is staff buy-in, and like everybody has to have some level of buy-in to really benefit from a culture of cybersecurity in your organization. And so I think it's, and Felipe said what in terms of working with the staff, not necessarily having everyone, provide input on every single policy, but I think the biggest thing is the explanation and education of why you're doing what's about to be done in terms of additional security controls, et cetera. Because it can be frustrated. It can be tough on people's workflow if they have to now do additional things to access a file they used to access pretty easily before, things like that. But as long as there's a real level of explanation to everybody involved, it obviously reduces the frustration level. Hopefully gets a lot more buy-in, and then it prevents what we see a lot, which is I don't know if anyone's heard the term shadow IT, and sometimes with shadow IT is essentially the use of technology outside of the organization's scope, right? So say you have a donor database that everyone in your organization uses, and somebody just basically signs up for another donor database and starts using it without the knowledge of everybody in the organization. So that's a shadow donor database, basically. And so we've seen that happen. Sometimes it happens because people are just trying to be creative and get really creative with their work and trying to try tools out. And sometimes it's just out of frustration. They're very frustrated with the way the systems are set up, and they essentially try to find an easier way. But again, you do not want your donor database in a database that only one person knows about, and you don't, as an organization, you have no idea how it's protected, what's in it, et cetera. So it's extremely important that everybody is involved, and that everyone is explained to as to what these new processes, policies, controls are going to be in your organization, so that you prevent not only just workflow frustration, but prevent something that could be deeper and more dangerous to your data.
Thank you, Francis. Okay. What we want to do now is walk you through like a full risk assessment process. And what we're explaining to you here is the process that we here at Tech Impact do on the cybersecurity team. Just to give you a better idea and appreciation for the entire process and how you can start from not knowing what's going on in your organization to understanding what's happening and having a plan to move forward. Um, So we start with the first step, which we see here is we have to understand what your organization does, how they do it, what type of data they collect, where do they store data, how does data move around through the organization or through other third parties. Um, it's important to make sure we uncover everything in your organization in terms of data movements. And there's a few questions that we also ask to understand what security controls you have in place already, or maybe not. And we note those. And then also, if you have a platform, a production collaboration platform like Google or Microsoft, for example, we will request read-only access. We can do that with Microsoft, I believe. And we can go in there and review the security posture of that platform to also perhaps show you some gaps that you weren't aware existed. And if any diagrams you have as well on your network, or you have application inventories, any type of visual or inventory type documents that would help us better understand your entire digital landscape. So we take all that information and then we bring it back and we start reviewing it. We assess the controls that you have or you don't have to understand where you are on that standpoint. We review, as I mentioned before, your production collaboration platform to make sure, number one, you have the right configurations based on the type of capabilities there, your email, your multi-factor, whatever other configurations are available there. And whatever's not there, we make a note of it and we start documenting all of our findings. And we can also scan from the outside your website, your organization website, and firewall if you have one, to see if there are any gaps, security gaps there, any vulnerabilities that you may not be aware of. So when we start putting all that together into different reports, right? So the initial report that we'll provide for you is your actual risk assessment, which explains this is what we looked at, this is what we found, these are the threats most likely to attack your organization, and here are the risks which you currently are exposed to. And the risks, the word risk gets misused quite often, and unfortunately in industry. So what risk is really is just the probability of something bad happening, something you don't want to happen. And the actual event could be, for example, a social engineering breach, which yields your admin credentials. And then that leads to compromise of your entire environment. That may be a risk, right? Or another risk may be insider risk. As I mentioned before, 99% of the time, all organizations will have insider risk as something they have to manage. And the important thing to realize is a lot of the risks that we discover are risks that you won't be able to eliminate. So it's important to note that it'll just be risks that you're exposed to simply because of the way you operate. Just by connecting to the internet and sending emails, you're exposed to certain risks that will always be there. The idea is not to try to eliminate the risk. The idea is to manage them at an acceptable level. So we may bring a report to you that shows you have 3 high risks because you're missing controls. And so once you implement those controls, we can bring that risk down to a medium or a low. And then maybe that's where you stay, and that's fine. The important thing is that you're aware of it and you're managing it. In some rare cases, there may be some risks that you're able to avoid. For example, if we discover during our risk analysis that you have an on-premise network with a firewall and a VPN that people use to remote in, and the firewall is out of date, it cannot be upgraded anymore, and it's vulnerable to attackers coming in. So in that case, we may recommend you to avoid that risk by sunsetting the firewall, moving your server to the cloud. In that case, you would be able to eliminate that risk because you're no longer performing that activity. You're not exposed to that hazard anymore. So it's important to understand how to interpret those risk assessment results. And you'll also receive the findings and recommendations report, which is a bit more technical, we'll get into the weeds in terms of these are the settings that we found, for example, in Office 365 or Google, that you really should change, or that maybe some implementations are missing altogether. So that'll be like the technical list of things that need to get fixed, so to speak. And then we'll also provide you with a list of controls based on the initial controls assessment that makes sense for your organization to have, so that you can have something to work towards after the assessment's complete. You can implement those controls that are missing and then stay on top of those controls, keeping them healthy, as we mentioned before, via quarterly audits, for example. It's important to note that this exercise isn't a one-time thing. It should be repeated at least once a year, so that you can identify, okay, are we still doing, number one, are we exposed to any additional risks? Because anytime anything changes in your organization, you have to kind of reevaluate. A new application comes in, we have a new capability, maybe a new department doing something new, capturing different types of data. So any of those changes requires a reassessment to make sure that you're not exposed to new risk that you're not managing. And of course, we'll sit with you and deliver the reports, walk you through them, and explain to you what that path forward looks like. Do we have any questions about the process? If not, I'll move on to the final slide. So again, as I mentioned before, this is once you start that first risk assessment, it's the beginning of a journey, right? So taking your organization from maybe a place where you were not aware of what risk you were exposed to understanding what risks you're exposed to and managing them, and then you continue that process throughout the life cycle of your organization. And you do two things. Number one, you help protect your critical assets, and then also help protect your ability to deliver on your mission. Francis, anything to add on this one?
I know. I think the image speaks for itself. It's a cycle, and it's just you finish one thing, you move to the next thing, you move back up, and so obviously it's not from a frequency perspective. And not every organization has to do this with the same frequency, but it's important to understand the steps to risk management and how one goes before the other, et cetera. So yeah, so we we just wanted to call that out specifically. It's not a one and done thing at all. Just to keep on top of things as things progress, as you introduce new technologies to your organization. That's usually a point of, okay, let's reassess at that point. As things evolve within your organization, so should your risk management as well, your risk management process. So yeah. So got 3 minutes. I guess we can get some questions in. A couple questions in before the end.
And you can go longer because you still have a lot of people hanging on, so you can go longer to answer
Oh,
questions.
fair enough.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Aretha. Next question is coming from Tommy. He's asking, where would you classify the pop-up blue lock screen attacks as an opportunity attack?
Did you catch that, Francis?
Me see. Can you repeat that? Sorry, I was trying to find it.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact context, but it's asking, where would you classify the pop-up blue lock screen attacks? Is this an opportunity attack? I think it's asking what type of attack you would
Oh,
consider.
okay. No, I wouldn't call. At that point, it sounds more like a browser-based attack, which is usually a little bit more sophisticated than just essentially spamming for an opening, right? Is that how you're seeing that question, Felipe?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it's one of those ones that just gets kind of sent to everybody.
Yeah.
Not really very targeted. Um,
If we can do a quick fire on the questions.
Sure.
All right, cool.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yes. Let's see. Are Google Docs considered secure for sensitive information?
They
Yes.
they
Yes. They can
yeah
be. So you have
yeah
to essentially protect the document, right? You can store it in Google Docs, you just have to protect it,
yeah.
authentication, 2FA, etc. So yeah, it's a matter of what you do with the documents once it's in Google Docs. You can use Google, you can use Microsoft. You just have to protect your data within those platforms.
Yeah, staying on top of the access method.
Mhm.
Yes, another question here asking about using LastPass single sign-on through Microsoft. Is that a recommended tool?
Uh, using Oh, okay. I think the person asked the second, clarified the question. So you can use your Microsoft credentials, and I think this is where the person was going. You can use your Microsoft credentials to log into several different platforms, including LastPass. I think that's the question. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, as a single sign-on, absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's a bit of this is a big question, but what is the best way to stay updated on things, cybersecurity, the latest threats, things of this nature?
Felipe, you got that.
Yeah, so there's different organizations that send out newsletters. SANS is a good one, I think. SANS. I think it's sans.org, maybe. That you can sign up for their Ouch newsletter. And I think that that newsletter, the language tends to be a little bit less technical and more kind of for the everyday user. And I found that to be a good way to kind of stay up to date on the latest threats or vulnerabilities that are impacting users. That's the one that I would recommend.
I would add CISA.gov. That's the government security, their cybersecurity and information security agency. And so they have also pretty good newsletter, and they are usually on top of advisories and things like that. So
Mhm.
CISA.gov.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you. Anne is asking, what is credential stuffing?
So that's a method. Okay, so that's essentially attempting to log in. So it's essentially a bunch of attempts on a login. So ultimately, let's just use 365 for example.
Mhm.
Everyone can get to mail.office365.com, for example, because it's an internet website. Anyone can get to it. Credential stuffing in that case would take that website, take a username, or just look at, and the username is essentially somebody's email. So I can take my email address, see that I'm using 365, and essentially spam the authentication or stuff credentials into that login until I get logged in. Now, there's a very easy way to block that is having additional authentication. So it doesn't really matter if you get the first credential login, you get blocked on the second try. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's a way of automating an authentication, basically automating a hack against a login, essentially what it is. And a 365, I use that because it's an online platform that anyone can get to, and try this essentially.
Sure, sounds good. I think we have time for one more. Um, Audrey reports, I'm receiving many DocuSign documents that are not legitimate. I'm assuming this is by email.
Right.
Have you seen this? I'm sure we all have. And what is
Yeah.
best practice when you see something like that?
So for this one, what I tell people, for DocuSign or whatever else, if you receive notifications in your email, say it's from DocuSign, don't click anything in the email. I recommend everyone have a DocuSign account and you just go to the website. And if it's legitimate, it'll be there shared to you. And you can do this with anything. If you get emails they say they're from your bank or they say they're from a shared document at Microsoft, rather than click anything in the email, you can just go to Microsoft.com, log in, and again, if it's actual real document someone shared with you, you'll be able to see it there. If it's a notification from your bank that's legitimate, when you log into your bank application on your phone or website, you'll see it there. So there's really no need to click any of the links in the email when it's from a well-known source like that.
Sure. Perfect. Thank you. Great advice. That is what we have time for this afternoon. Thank you, Felipe. Thank you, Francis. And we will see you all soon.
All right. Thank you.